The clock struck 9 as Alan Duarte, a millionaire renowned for his wealth and arrogance, strode through the glass doors of the prestigious Bellevue restaurant. Dressed in a flawless suit and wearing a smug smile, he exuded an unshakable confidence, both captivating and unnerving. The restaurant was the epitome of luxury. Crystal chandeliers hung over tables adorned with white linens, while a pianist played a soothing melody that echoed off polished wooden walls. Alan walked to his table with deliberate steps, ignoring the waiter who held out his chair as though such courtesy was beneath him. As he sat, he cast a judgmental glance at the waitress approaching his table. Laura Santos, a young woman with expressive eyes, brown hair neatly tied in a bun, and an immaculate uniform, carried a tray with practiced ease. Her posture was steady, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease upon noticing Alan. "Good evening, sir. May I start you off with something to drink?" she asked politely, though cautiously. Alan stared at her for a moment, his lips curling into a faint smirk brimming with disdain. "Red wine," he said after briefly consulting the menu. "Something worthy of my palate, if this place even has such a thing." The remark made Laura swallow hard, though she maintained her composure, nodding courteously before walking away. Alan turned to his business associates at the table, making a derisive comment. "It's too much to expect decent service these days." When Laura returned with the wine, the atmosphere felt heavier, as though tension lingered over the table. She carefully poured the drink, but in a moment of bad luck, the glass overflowed slightly, and a drop landed on Alan's pristine tie. He froze. Silence rippled through the restaurant like a wave. All eyes turned to him. "Of course," he began, his voice dripping with sarcasm and irritation. "This would happen. You can't even manage the simplest task, can you?" The dry laugh that followed was worse than any shout. Laura, visibly shaken, hurried to grab a napkin to clean the fabric, but Alan brushed her hand aside brusquely. "Just leave. Before you do something even more ridiculous." Laura stepped back, her breathing uneven as she clutched the napkin tightly. For a moment, her eyes met Alan's, and he noticed something beyond shame. A sadness so profound it seemed to scream in silence. She turned and quickly retreated to the kitchen, disappearing from view. "Well, now that's over," Alan declared, turning back to his guests. But something inside him felt unsettled. He tried to ignore it, but Laura's expression echoed in his mind like a persistent shadow. In the kitchen, Laura leaned against the sink, taking deep breaths to stop the tears. It wasn't the first time someone had treated her as though she had no value, but the public humiliation felt unbearably cruel. She knew she had to return to the dining floor to finish her shift. "You can do this, Laura," she whispered to herself, mustering the strength. Meanwhile, at the table, one of Alan's colleagues commented casually, "Don't you think you were a bit harsh on her, Alan?" But he merely shrugged, replying indifferently, "People like her need to learn to do better." Laura Santos sat on a wooden bench in the restaurant's back room, still trying to steady her breathing. The silence of the kitchen contrasted with the elegant chatter in the dining area, making the space feel like a fragile sanctuary from her painful reality. As she rubbed her trembling hands, her mind pulled her into memories she tried desperately to suppress. Her parents, Clara and Fernando, had always been her foundation. Hard-working and humble, they dedicated their lives to giving Laura and her younger sister, Beatriz, a better future. Her father, a chauffeur for a wealthy family, and her mother, a seamstress, believed education was the only way out of their hardships. Laura excelled in her studies, dreaming of becoming a doctor, a way to save lives and repay her parents' sacrifices. But tragedy struck one rainy morning. Her parents died in a car accident on their way to pick up Beatriz from school. Laura vividly remembered the phone call she received while sitting in her college classroom. "I'm sorry to inform you," the police officer's words echoed in her mind, bringing back the suffocating weight of loss and despair. Life, once on a clear path, turned upside down. Laura left college to care for Beatriz, then only 8 years old. With the little money her parents had left behind, she managed to pay rent for a few months, but it quickly ran out. Laura abandoned her dreams and took any job she could find. Working as a waitress at Bellevue was the closest thing to stability she had achieved in years. Returning to the kitchen, Laura discreetly wiped her face before stepping back onto the floor. An older colleague, Dona Marissa, noticed her shaken expression and approached. "He was cruel, wasn't he?" Marissa asked in a low voice. Laura simply nodded, avoiding a breakdown during her shift. "It's not the first time, Marissa, and it won't be the last. But I can't afford to fall apart." Laura's resilience was evident even as her thoughts weighed heavily on her. As she served another table, an elderly customer handed her a small note along with the bill. "You have a special spark, young lady. Don't let anyone dim it." The simple, heartfelt words brought tears to Laura's eyes, though she held them back. For her, they were a reminder that, even in the shadows, some saw her light. The following night, Bellevue was once again bustling, and Laura, despite her mounting exhaustion, moved between tables with her usual professionalism. She had learned to face her routine with resilience, even knowing that in such an environment, humiliation was always a lurking possibility. When she saw Alan Duarte walk through the door again, accompanied by other businessmen, her chest tightened. He had returned. Laura took a deep breath, adjusted her apron, and tried to ensure her expression did not betray her unease. Alan seemed unchanged, confident, arrogant, and oblivious to the emotions of those around him. However, something in his eyes looked different as they briefly met hers. He didn't greet her or make any remarks, but Laura couldn't shake the sense that he was observing her. As she tended to other tables, fragments of Alan's conversation floated to her ears. He was discussing business, as always, something about a new venture, a multimillion-dollar partnership, and a joke about people who never amount to anything. Then he turned slightly and said, with the same dismissive tone as the previous night, "You know, Laura, some people never leave their place in life." For a moment, the entire restaurant seemed to disappear around her. Laura felt her blood boil, but she kept her composure. With measured steps, she approached Alan's table, leaned slightly forward, and looking directly at him, replied with calm but firm resolve. "And some people climb so high only to realize they have no idea where they actually want to be." The silence that followed was deafening. Alan, visibly taken aback, blinked a few times as if processing her words. One of the businessmen at his table chuckled nervously to break the tension, but no one joined him. Laura, maintaining her poise, adjusted the tray in her arms and walked away without saying anything else. In the minutes that followed, Alan fidgeted. He pretended to resume conversation with his colleagues, but Laura's words echoed in his mind, unsettling him. For the first time in a long while, someone had challenged him so directly, and with such grace. Meanwhile, Laura was dealing with the aftermath of her boldness. Though a part of her felt satisfied for standing up for herself, she was anxious. What if Alan complained to management? What if she lost her job? These thoughts swirled in her mind as she continued serving other tables. Later that evening, near closing time, Laura was organizing trays near the bar when Alan approached her, his demeanor uncharacteristically subdued. "Do you always talk to your customers like that?" he asked, his tone lacking its usual sarcasm. Laura didn't shy away from his gaze. "I always defend myself when someone tries to make me feel smaller than I am." Her response was direct but without hostility. Alan was silent for a moment, observing her as though seeing something in her for the first time. "Interesting," he muttered, more to himself than to her, before giving a slight nod and walking back to his table. The brief interaction left Laura puzzled, but she brushed it off, deciding he was just being eccentric. To her, he was still just another arrogant customer who, for some reason, felt the need to talk to her again. But for Alan, that brief exchange left an indelible impression. He didn't know why, but he felt compelled to understand who this waitress was, a woman who had the audacity to challenge him without hesitation. As he left the restaurant that night, an idea began to form in his mind. Something about Laura intrigued him in a way he couldn't ignore. Alan's curiosity burned brighter than ever. He was a man used to getting what he wanted, and uncovering more about Laura became his newest obsession. That same night, in the comfort of his luxurious penthouse, he opened his laptop and typed her name with precision. What he found was both surprising and unsettling. Laura Santos was not who he had assumed. An old article, nearly a decade old, caught his attention. It was a feature on promising young talents. A rising star in medicine at the prestigious University of São Paulo. In the accompanying photo, Laura smiled alongside other students, her eyes radiating a light he hadn't seen in the woman he encountered at the restaurant. Intrigued, Alan kept digging. Piece by piece, her story came together. He read about the car accident that took her parents, her decision to drop out of university to care for her younger sister, and the years of struggle to survive. Every detail made Alan feel increasingly uncomfortable, but one name stood out and froze him in place. Fernando Santos. Fernando was a name Alan knew well. He had been the Duarte family chauffeur for many years, a kind man who had often driven young Alan to school and always offered a kind word. Treat people with respect, son. Life has strange ways of teaching humility, Fernando used to say. Alan, back then a self-centered teenager, never paid much attention. Now, those words came back to him with startling clarity. The weight of the discovery was immediate. The waitress he had humiliated was the daughter of the man who had once dedicated his life to serving Alan's family. The irony was overwhelming. Alan stood abruptly, as though the gravity of the revelation was too much to bear sitting down. Memories of Fernando's kindness clashed with his own cruel treatment of Laura, creating a storm of guilt within him. In the days that followed, Alan couldn't shake the guilt that clung to him. He was accustomed to solving problems with money, but he knew that approach wouldn't repair the damage he had caused. Apologizing outright seemed trivial, almost meaningless compared to what Laura had endured. Determined, Alan decided to act differently. Genuinely. He began visiting Belleville regularly, always ensuring he sat in one of Laura's sections. This time, however, he refrained from making sarcastic remarks or displaying his usual arrogance. He thanked her for small gestures, complimented the service, and even started tipping generously, though he made sure to keep his demeanor neutral. Laura, however, remained skeptical. For her, his presence was a constant reminder of the humiliation she had suffered. One evening, as the restaurant emptied out, Alan waited outside for Laura to finish her shift. When she emerged, she seemed surprised and annoyed to see him there. "What do you want now?" she asked, her voice laced with irritation. "I know you don't trust me," Alan began, his tone more humble than she had ever heard. "But I need to do something for you. For your sister. Not out of pity, but because it's the right thing to do." Laura's eyes narrowed. "Do you think you can fix everything with money, Alan? My life isn't one of your business deals where you invest and expect something in return. That's not what this is," he insisted. "I've made so many mistakes, Laura. But after learning about your father, your story, I feel like I owe it to him to try to do something meaningful." The mention of her father made Laura flinch. She took a moment to respond, her voice trembling slightly. "If you want to honor my father, then start treating people with respect. That would be the greatest gift you could give him." Her words struck Alan like a blow. He nodded, realizing she was right. As Laura walked away, he stood on the sidewalk, promising himself that he would follow through. Not just for her but for the memory of Fernando. Alan began taking action. He discreetly contacted a doctor who had been treating Beatriz and covered the costs of her surgery. He arranged for her to have access to top specialists and resources. All of this was done without informing Laura. He didn't want her to feel indebted to him. Meanwhile, at the restaurant, Alan's behavior continued to evolve. He engaged with staff respectfully, even helping to stack chairs at the end of the night, a gesture that left the employees astonished. Laura watched from a distance, still unsure if this change in him was genuine or temporary. The turning point came when Beatriz's doctor informed Laura that her sister's surgery had been fully funded. Confused and overwhelmed, Laura pieced together that Alan must have been responsible. That night, she confronted him as he was leaving the restaurant. "You paid for Beatriz's surgery, didn't you?" she demanded, her voice a mix of anger and emotion. Alan turned to face her, guilt and sincerity evident in his expression. "Yes, I did," he admitted. "Because I wanted to help. Not to buy your forgiveness but because it was the right thing to do." Laura's voice wavered. "Why? Why get involved in my life at all?" "Because I need to," Alan said earnestly. "Your father believed I could be better than the selfish man I became. Helping you and Beatriz. It's the least I can do to start proving him right." Weeks later, Beatriz underwent her surgery, and the results were positive. Laura was relieved, but she remained conflicted. While she was grateful for Alan's help, she couldn't fully accept it without questioning his motives. Part of her still believed he was trying to buy redemption, no matter how genuine he seemed. One evening, Alan returned to Belleville, and Laura decided it was time for a direct conversation. She approached his table during a quiet moment and sat across from him, her arms crossed. "Why are you doing all of this, Alan? What do you really want?" Alan looked at her, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "I don't want anything, Laura. I just want to be better. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm doing something that matters. And it's because of you." Laura sighed, shaking her head. "You don't need me to change, Alan. If you want to be better, do it for yourself, not for me." Alan nodded, his gaze steady. I am doing it for myself. But you showed me what strength and resilience really look like. You've been through so much, and yet you never gave up. That's what inspires me. Laura was silent for a moment, trying to process his words. She had spent so much of her life fighting alone that the idea of someone genuinely wanting to help her was difficult to accept. If you're serious about changing, Alan, it's going to take more than money and grand gestures. Change comes from actions. Consistent ones. I know, he replied. And I'm willing to do the work. The sincerity in his voice moved her more than she was willing to admit. She stood, still unsure if she could fully trust him, but for the first time, she felt that perhaps he truly understood what she was trying to say. Months later, Laura's life had begun to stabilize. Beatrice was recovering well, and with the burden of her medical care lifted, Laura could focus on rebuilding their lives. Meanwhile, Alan had thrown himself into philanthropic work, organizing events to support young people from underprivileged backgrounds. These efforts were his way of honoring Fernando's legacy and proving to himself that he could be better. At one of these charity events, Laura and Alan crossed paths again. Laura had been invited by one of Beatrice's doctors, who admired her resilience and wanted to connect her with others in similar situations. Nervous but encouraged by Beatrice, Laura decided to attend. When their eyes met across the room, Alan approached her cautiously. Laura, he said with a warm, genuine smile. I didn't expect to see you here. Neither did I, she replied, her tone calm but curious. They talked quietly in a corner of the room. Alan shared the progress of his philanthropic work, and Laura acknowledged the changes she had noticed in him. You've come a long way, she admitted, her voice softer than before. So have you, Alan replied. I've never admired anyone as much as I admire you. Did this story touch your heart? It's a powerful reminder that redemption is possible and that true change comes from within. Share this story with someone who may need inspiration to start their own journey toward growth and kindness. What would you have done in Laura's place? Would you have forgiven Alan? Let us know your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to follow for more inspiring stories like this. Subscribe to stay up to date with stories that move, inspire and captivate. Comment below and join the conversation. Share this story to inspire someone today. What is your opinion? We'd love to hear it.